Yo, what's good YouTube? It's your host HD Samurai here, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're bringing y'all a new what if, this being the what if movie, to what if Deku had Rick Sanchez intelligence. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this what if, and thank you to the person who commented down this video idea. I saw your comments, so here's the what if. Hopefully you do enjoy. If you guys have your own what if ideas, you guys should already know the procedures. Just type down below and I'll see on whether or not I want to make them, alright? But besides that, y'all, it's your host HD Samurai here, and your boy doesn't have anything else to announce, so with that being said, let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different? Man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
So to begin the what if, we're not going to start off with Deku's origins. Now when Deku was a child, we actually see him growing up a pretty normal childhood all the way to the point of kindergarten. Now during this time, if it was like the main timeline, we will see Deku actually make a pretty good group of friends, with one of them including Bakugo until he unlocked his quirk. But in this timeline, Deku just completely avoids all the other kids, and not for the reason that you're thinking, as unlike in this timeline, Deku is not shy. In fact, he's very straightforward and blunt. No, the main reason why he avoids them is because of the fact that he truly believes that they're childish. And not only that, but he just simply cannot fall into their same interest. As while all the other kids were talking about their favorite heroes and what type of quirks they wanted, Deku was much more realistic and actually thinking about what career path he wants to choose, and not only that, but also actually focusing on his own studies, which is something that Deku genuinely enjoyed, as the idea of just simply studying and getting knowledge and pushing it even further was something that he just loved, as literally it didn't matter what it was. It could be something as simple as learning a recipe for a meal, and Deku will be trying to find a way to push it to its absolute limit. And this will actually end up becoming a reoccurring theme throughout the rest of kindergarten, as whenever the teachers will end up giving work to the students, Deku will be the first one to turn it in, but when they end up seeing what he's done, they see that not only did he answer the question, but he ended up pushing it into a whole new level. For example, if it was something about learning numbers, Deku ended up pushing it back to be that of addition or subtraction. And if it was something about addition and subtraction, it will be coming back to them as something about multiplication and division. So over time, the teachers begin to see a reoccurring theme here, as they begin to suspect that Deku may have actually developed a quirk, and they even brought this to Inko. Now Inko was very happy about this and immediately took Deku to a quirk doctor, even though Deku was very against it, as during the time when they actually see the doctor, they ended up finding out the so-called dreadful news that Deku was actually quirkless. Now Inko was very heartbroken about this, as she thought that Deku was going to be upset, but to her surprise, Deku just simply shrugged it off. As honestly, at this point in time, Deku began to think of quirks as more of a curse than anything else. I mean, if you were lucky, and I mean really lucky, you would be gifted with a very good quirk, something that could be used to actually save people and actually help the environment and everything. But half the time, if they actually took a real good look at these quirks, they would see the same thing that he saw. A bunch of dumb, weird abilities that end up sprouting out of nowhere that serve to no real purpose at all. What is the point of having your eyeballs being the only part of your body that stretches? What is the point of suddenly making your fingers longer? What is the point of literally having a box for a head? What was the point? It didn't make any sense. So with this reoccurring theme just appearing multiple times in Deku's eyes, he begins to see that quirks weren't really all that, and actually are more of a curse than anything else. So as soon as Deku once again re-enters school and goes about his studies, he just completely avoids the topic of quirks entirely, but this actually ends up making people think that Deku might be upset about the fact that he didn't have a quirk. To which, while some of the students actually felt pity for him, others were just completely laughing at him, calling him quirkless, and actually just completely avoiding him, with one of them actually being none other than Bakugo. As Bakugo by this point already unlocked his quirk, to which Deku had to admit he was very lucky, as he had the ability to sweat nitroglycerin and cause explosions. So when it was announced that Deku actually didn't have a quirk, Bakugo was actually the very first person to begin to insult him. But the thing is, by this point already, Deku had already unlocked his entire identity. So by that I mean Deku already unlocked his own personality, the way he views things, and basically he already knows who he is as a person. As Deku is extremely blunt, honest, he's someone who's very hypocritical at times, and he would admit it, but at the same time, he's someone who follows this very same philosophy as many of us do. The philosophy of just simply not giving a fuck about what other people say that you have no care for whatsoever. So whenever Bakugo begins to insult Deku about not having a quirk, Deku would just simply ignore him. Whenever Bakugo and his friends try to pull a prank on Deku, Deku would be able to see it coming and actually avoid it, which ends up pissing them off. And whenever they would actually make an attempt to make Deku feel bad about not having a quirk, Deku would just do something that pretty much everyone else does: ignore them and move on. And this becomes a reoccurring theme, as this would just end up pissing off Bakugo and everyone else that tries to bully Deku. But another thing that they were not noticing was the fact that Deku was making drastic improvements, as by now his knowledge, and let me just remind you once again, by this point Deku is still in kindergarten. Deku's knowledge by this point is that of a high schooler, as he's been pushing his knowledge so hard to the point where now Deku is actually seeing things on a high school level. And not only that, but Deku also got an interest when it comes to science and also robotics. As you see Deku at home just simply building robots in his room, and when his mother actually found out about this, she immediately begins to use everything in her power to support Deku and his ambitions. Now Deku tried to tell her multiple times that he didn't need it, as after all, he understood how hard it was for Inko to take care of him when she's the only parent around. But you see, Inko still insisted on helping, mostly because of the fact that she wanted to actually show Deku that no matter what he does, she'll always be there to support him. And Deku, actually finally getting to terms about this, understood, but he made sure to only use up a reasonable amount of budget. As after all, he doesn't want his mother to go, wasting money like that and being forced to work for longer periods of time. So with that, we see Deku actually building robots and different contraptions as he begins to get more and more fascinated about it and pushing it to even further limits. We see Deku actually begin to build up an entire journal, and not even just one, but multiple of them in his room, almost filling an entire library basically of him actually studying and pushing things to the absolute limit. As Deku will be writing down everything he's done throughout the rest of the experiment, throughout the times that he's been making different devices and everything, basically writing down like log entries for what they do. And not only that, but Deku will be analyzing them and making sure like what they do and basically. So yeah, basically Deku's just already by this point becoming an entire encyclopedia for his own creations. And that was not the only thing. Deku was also making sure to keep an eye on everything that's been happening when it comes to quirks, as well as heroes as well. And the main reason for this one is not because of the fact that Deku somehow got an interest in them or anything like that, although he did have to admit he did took an interest in a little bit of an interest when it came to quirks, and more precisely the quirks that were actually good. Not the ones that were garbage, of course. No, those ones are just garbage. But the ones that are actually good, that have a very interesting ability or unique one, Deku took an interest in those as he actually thought of ideas to push them even further and wondering how far they can go. But the main reason why Deku was actually focusing on heroes and everything like that was because of the fact that Deku actually began to envision something that was actually playing at his noggin. And that being the fact that Deku actually truly wondered what would have been like if these incidents just simply never occurred. What if the villains' attacks were actually stopped before they even happened? I mean, sure, they had heroes running around to put an end to whatever plans they were starting, but at the same time, they still end up leaving multiple, and I mean multiple amount of destruction laying waste after the battle. And sure, although there are quirks there to actually recover and rebuild all the damage that was done, still the damage happened nonetheless. So with that thought in mind, Deku actually wondered if there was a way to prevent the incidents before they even happened. So with that thought in mind, we see Deku pushing his robotics even further, pushing himself even further, as this will actually cause Deku to skip grades throughout the rest of his school year, leaving every last one of his old classmates behind, leaving all his old bullies behind, leaving even Bakugo behind. As now that Deku actually moved past this, we see him making multiple academic achievements throughout his entire time of school, as Deku goes to first grade, second grade, skipping most of elementary, then going straight to middle school and skipping most of that, all the way to the point where he actually ends up finishing high school, and he does all this by the time of being simply at the age of 10. As just as you heard, Deku finished all of high school by the age of 10, and he kept pushing it even further. As soon afterwards, even after accomplishing all of high school, Deku decided to go to college. And just like he does in high school, he goes through it with full marks and everything, surprising everyone once again. As Deku's intelligence was so mind-boggling, especially when they found out that he didn't have a quirk, that made many people actually try to get his attention. Many news stories about him, even got a chance to be on a show, on a late night TV show, got a chance to be approached by the media, and basically Deku was known as the boy genius, a once in a lifetime prodigy. and basically he was pretty much highly praised by everyone. As so far, things seem to be going really good for Deku. But unfortunately for Deku himself, we actually end up seeing him take a ginormous shift. And the main reason for this one is because of the fact that Deku by this point has matured way too quickly. I mean way too quickly. He finished all of high school, and now by this point, currently, he finished all of college as well. And Deku is pretty much being deemed for being a prodigy and being also special and everything, while at the same time not even having a quirk. But you see, this ended up causing Deku to actually see things for the way they simply are. And that being the fact that after having all this knowledge and pushing it even further, Deku begins to realize just how empty and lonely it is. That being the fact that Deku by this point just simply cannot relate to anyone. As after growing up and going about things the way he did, we see Deku actually end up viewing things differently than everyone else. For example, if there was a scary scene about to happen in a horror movie, Deku already understands what exactly is about to happen, how exactly people are going to react to it, and basically just the entire thing in general about how everything is going to go. Or if he were to talk about their struggles, Deku wouldn't be able to understand them at all, because by this point things go about pretty easy for him. Whether it be trying to build a device or trying to get people's attention, it didn't matter. Deku just knew how to achieve it, as he now knew how empty and lonely it was to have all this knowledge. With the only thing that's actually keeping Deku going being the fact that number one, he has to finish his bucket list, this being the fact that his younger self's wish of making the hero society safer and everything like that, Deku is still going about it, but it's not really much of a goal for him. It's more of a finishing a wish that you created as a kid, pretty much. Kind of finishing a bucket list, like I said earlier. And the other thing being his mother, as no matter how many times Deku just simply cannot relate to her, or no matter how many times he just simply explains that he simply cannot understand her, she would always be there to be giving some type of comfort to Deku, trying to tell him that it's not just completely hopeless. Sure, he has all this knowledge and a bunch of other things, but that doesn't mean that Deku cannot fit in with other people. It doesn't mean that he has to be alone. But unfortunately, with the way things end up going, with the way Deku ends up going about things, it seems as if that's just going to be the permanent way it's going to be like forever. Or so he thought. As you see, on a very certain day, as we see Deku currently holed up in his room, currently building another robot, as by this point, he's decided to just completely advance the entire house for Inko, so that way she actually has a much easier time when she gets back from work. But by the time that Deku was actually about to implant another advancement towards it, this is when suddenly Inko will walk into the room with an excited smile on her face. Now Deku looks confused until Inko ends up giving him a letter, as apparently someone heard about Deku, which was unsurprising, as by this point Deku is basically a celebrity. As Deku ends up reading the letter, he ends up finding out that he was actually invited, as he was actually invited by none other than David Shield. As currently right now, David Shield is actually holding a tour for a very select few of individuals to come visit his island. But the thing is, after hearing about Deku, he immediately took a very great interest in actually allowing him to approach the island, as he actually wanted to have a conversation with Deku. As after finding out about all of Deku's achievements and everything and the way he goes about things, as well as his supposed goal of trying to make the world safer and everything, he saw great potential in Deku, and actually even thought about making him his apprentice. But he needed to talk to him first, so he decided to actually reach out and send an invite. So when Deku actually finishes reading this letter, at first he was actually planning to decline this and make up an excuse. But unfortunately for Deku, he wouldn't be able to do that, as Inko actually really wanted to go, as she wants to actually have a moment where she can spend more time with her son, and not only that, but she also wants to actually go explore the islands, and she thought it would be really cool for both of them. And after seeing this sad look across his mother's face, Deku immediately accepted, as there was no way he was just simply gonna completely miss out on this and miss time on spending time with his mother. So after accepting this and after packing their bags, they soon end up going off to David Shield's island, to which when they end up arriving there, they end up seeing a bunch of people there, a ginormous tour group pretty much, as David Shield himself, as well as one of the guys that were working for him, begin to escort the people around, beginning to explain exactly what's going on. They begin to stop by at different exhibits and everything like that, all the while Deku's just there analyzing everything, breaking down all these different contraptions and all these different robots, not really being that impressed with it, all the way till the end of the tour, as we see everyone go their separate ways, until suddenly David Shield would actually call out to Deku, as well as Inko. Now, David Shield actually ends up approaching Deku and actually stretches out his hand to actually make his acquaintance, to which Deku does the same thing and tries to be as respectful as possible, but you could see, if you look very closely, the strain in his smile. As after that, we actually see David Shield try to have a conversation with Deku. Now, basically, the whole point of David Shield's, the whole point of inviting Deku here was actually trying to make Deku his apprentice, as he fully believes that Deku has the approach, the mindset, the potential, and basically he sees Deku being someone that he could very well actually do what he inspires to do, this being making the world a safer place. And Deku, after hearing this, immediately understood that he wasn't the person that David Shield actually thought he was. He wasn't a guy who was passionate with saving everyone. No, this was literally something that he was crossing off a bucket list, and that was it. So already Deku could understand that David Shield just simply did not understood him at all. Another thing that Deku was 100% sure that was definitely true, and another reason why he didn't actually feel like accepting this, was the fact that he actually was pretty confident that he may have been smarter than David Shield. This being the fact that he could already see the flaws that can build up with his inventions, and not only that, but he could already see multiple different ways of improving them. So already he felt confident about the fact that this man simply cannot teach him anything. And another thing was, and this one was honestly the one that made Deku 100% sure that he definitely was at the wrong agency, or this definitely was not right for him. And it was a simple fact that David Shield, when it came to talking about robotics and science and a bunch of other things, he talked about it so passionately, with feeling, something that reminded Deku of when he was actually much younger. To which Deku now, he just simply cannot have the same feeling when it comes to it. When it comes to building inventions and everything like that, it wasn't exactly a passion for Deku anymore. If anything, it was more or less just a hobby that he does. Something that he does just because he felt like doing it, nothing else. So already understanding that this guy was so passionate about it and the way he talked about his inventions and everything, Deku could already understand that these two were definitely not matching the same Wi-Fi. But right before Deku could even reject it though, this is when Inko wouldn't gladly sign up Deku for this apprenticeship, as he ends up looking at her completely in shock and everything like this. But the main reason why Inko did this is because she wanted Deku to actually find something to fill the void in, and she thinks that David Shield could help. So when she actually begins to tell Deku to accept this, and not only that, but when she actually talks to him with a smile and reassurance look, Deku can do nothing more but actually accept the offer, although he could already tell that this was going to be a bust. Or at least that's what he thought. As on a certain day, as Deku was actually apprenticing for David Shield, as he was staying there for at least a month along with his mother, he actually ended up meeting Melissa Shield. And both of them seemed to kind of hit it off almost immediately. As for some odd reason, although Melissa could not understand just how big Deku's problems were or anything like that, she was always there to actually call him out on it or try to comfort him in some type of way. And this kind of surprises Deku, since she'll be catching notice of things that even Deku himself doesn't catch notice of. For example, whenever he begins to lose feeling of any interest in David Shield's speech, Melissa would always be there to immediately begin to actually talk to Deku and try to change the subject, basically trying to get his mind off the conversation. Or whenever Deku was kind of feeling all empty and trying to be alone, she would always be there to accompany him and kind of get him out of this stump. Basically, she was always there to kind of support Deku whenever he was faced with the problem, which was crazy considering the fact that Deku seemed to have no problems at all. As throughout the entire apprenticeship, he seemed perfect, or at least to David Shield. But Melissa, she actually saw Deku for who he was, just a regular guy that was actually pretty smart. And it was due to this thought process that Melissa was actually able to get close to Deku, how both of them were able to actually interact with each other and actually reach a common ground, and the fact that Deku was somehow able to release all tension of being the smartest person and basically having nothing else to do, as somehow, some way, Melissa was actually filling in that void. Until eventually, both of them even decided to take it up a step further and pursue a relationship. As by the time that David's apprenticeship had finally come to an end, as Inko as well as Deku had to return back, this is when David Shield actually ended up recommending Deku to go to a certain place, this being none other than UA. And when Deku heard of this place, he immediately thought about declining, mostly because of the fact that he already finished college by this point. What was the point of going back to basically high school? But this is when Melissa actually ends up stepping up, and she ends up actually announcing that she's going to be going as well to UA. as Deku would actually end up getting caught off guard by this, as she would then drag Deku away for a little bit, as she begins to explain to Deku pretty much that this will give them further chance to take the relationship even further, but also give them an opportunity to finish off both of their dreams, or in Deku's case, his bucket list. As while she has her own dreams and ambitions that she wants to pursue, she also wants to spend time with Deku. And she already understands that what Deku's doing isn't really his true goal at this very moment, since by this point Deku doesn't really have a goal. But he's more or less just filling in a bucket list wish that he made as a kid. So basically she says that both of them can take care of their own goals while also getting the relationship to another level. And when Deku actually heard this for the first time in a while, he honestly felt excited about it. As with that, he ends up accepting about the fact of going to UA, as already David Shield had already recommended him to an old friend, this being All Might. As after both of them will end up going their parting ways, as they had to prepare for the days following until the UA entrance exam, this is where we now do a time skip. Flashing forward through multiple months by now, we eventually end up seeing the UA entrance exam kick off, with the only difference here being the fact that Deku does not have to actually take these exams, mostly because of the fact that number one, he's not going to be in the hero course, he's going to be in support, and number two, he already has basically a scholarship from David Shield, which allows him to actually enter the academy without having too much problems. Now when Deku enters the support course, he eventually ends up meeting a bunch of no-names, with the only one that really sticks out like a sore thumb being Hatsume, as she was quite energetic and explaining about her inventions, which she calls babies. But Deku wasn't really interested in none of that, considering the fact that by this point, like I said, when it comes to a bunch of science and all that stuff, he's not that interested in it anymore. The only real reason why he's here is to fill a bucket list and also to get his relationship with Melissa Shield to go even further. To which Melissa actually also ends up being in the same course as Deku, as both of them end up enjoying their time at the academy. As we now do a time skip. Now flashing forward a couple of weeks into the academy, we actually see them both already hard at work and making drastic improvements and being quite known around the entirety of the support course. Mostly because of the fact that number one, Deku was actually a pretty famous celebrity, being known as a boy genius and all, while at the same time, Melissa is already David Shield's daughter. And not only that, but she's also very intelligent. Not on Deku's level, but at the same time she's intelligent enough to the point where she literally washes over everyone else, including Hatsume. Now when Hatsume sees the two of them hard at work, she immediately was very excited at this, begging them to join her in some of the projects and everything, to which Melissa accepts, but Deku has to actually be dragged along into this, mostly because of the fact that he really did not want to do it, but Melissa being Melissa, she just drags him into it. So basically all three of them end up forming this study group to where they're basically being well known throughout the rest of the support course. And not only just in the support course, but everywhere else around the rest of UA. As multiple of the new devices and contraptions the heroes are using nowadays are actually being caused by them. As thanks to their combined intelligence, they actually were able to create quite powerful devices that actually allow villains to be captured much more quickly. For example, a bracelet that when it activates, it can actually end up breaking itself apart before wrapping around the entire enemy or villain. And when it does, it basically ends up shutting down their bodies, causing them to either fall into unconsciousness or just simply not be able to activate their quirks, allowing them to be restrained much easier. And this already brought down a large amount of crime rate in just a couple of weeks, surprising many of the heroes, and also causing the support course to gain a lot of attention. As flashing a little bit more forward into the story, we actually end up seeing Deku once again, as he was once again hard at work, making another device, as people were making a large amount of requests to the support course in order to get more gear so that way they can actually help out when fighting criminals. But during this time though, this is when suddenly Deku would actually be approached by none other than Nezu. And not only Nezu, but also Aizawa, who actually seemed to have gone back with an injury. Now Deku looks at this confused, as this is when Nezu actually calls Deku into his office, to which he ends up going reluctantly. As soon after a little quick journey of just simply walking to Nezu's office, Deku ends up arriving there, and when he does, he actually ends up getting a brief about what exactly happened. So this will be actually after the USJ incident, as unfortunately, thanks to the fact that Deku wasn't in Class 1A, that means that he didn't actually go on the trip, and that means he wasn't part of the whole event. Yet at the same time, somehow, some way, Deku actually saved them and prevented a large amount of casualties. As you see, during the time when the USJ incident was happening, their team, being actually one of the few heroes that actually got devices from Deku, actually ended up using this device to actually realize that her entire quirk, this being Black Hole, was pushed on a much higher level, sucking up a generous amount of villains and taking down a large majority of them. This ends up catching the villains completely off guard, and with Aizawa also helping, they were actually able to take care of them much easier. And what's crazy is the fact that if that was not enough evidence to show just how powerful Deku's devices were, during the time when Nomu was actually released to attack 13, she activated this device once again, and her quirk had once again been amped up to the point where it completely absorbed and ripped the Nomu to shreds, surprising Kodagiri as well as surprising Shigaraki, before both of them were actually ended up taken down by Aizawa and then soon captured. Now when Deku actually ends up hearing about all this, he doesn't understand what exactly is the big problem about it, as from his perspective, he basically ended up saving everyone's asses, so he doesn't understand why they're so gloom and down about everything. Or at least, he didn't know until the point where they actually ended up announcing that Shigaraki as well as Kodagiri had been broken out of the facility that they were supposed to be trapped in, surprising Deku as he now actually ends up looking at them. And to make matters even worse is the fact that after Kodagiri as well as Shigaraki got broken out, they actually now truly found out exactly why they got beaten up, mostly because of the fact of Deku's device. So they now have their attention on the person who created those devices, to which luckily for now they don't know. So basically by the end of all this explanation, they tell Deku that from now on they're gonna have to keep the creator of all these inventions to be anonymous, aka him. At the same time, they're also telling Deku to be very cautious when it comes to being out in public, as after all, although they can keep who made these inventions anonymous, they can't keep Deku's popularity down as well. Mostly because of the fact that Deku is pretty well known. After all, he was deemed as the boy genius and a prodigy. So yeah, obviously there's no way he's going to be able to kind of hide away from the public, unless he actually tries. And Deku, already understanding this, nods his head as he decides to just go about his day. But right before he leaves, he actually ends up getting announced by Nezu about the fact that the UA Sports Festival was coming up, and even the support course has to participate, which causes Deku to twitch his eyebrow but nods his head. So soon after that day, we actually end up seeing Deku make quite a few amount of devices meant to pretty much hide his identity and everything like that whenever he actually goes out in public. Of course, he does end up deactivating sometimes here and there so he can actually enjoy his time with Melissa. But other than that, Deku's making sure to make multiple different devices to make sure that he is safe, and also to ensure the safety of everyone he cares about. As now that we're done understanding all this, we can now continue on with the story. Flashing forward all the way to the UA Sports Festival, we actually see Deku now participating along with the rest of the students in the support class. And if you didn't know, if you were part of the support class, you were allowed to bring your own devices. So every single one of them were actually stacked up with their own devices and everything to show it off to everyone in public. And Deku would actually be one of those people, but the thing is, he put a limit on himself, mostly because of the fact that he knows how destructive his devices could be. But enough about that being said, as we can now start off with the very first portion of the UA Sports Festival, this being the obstacle course, which we see Deku actually go by relatively easily. As although Deku does not bring any of his more destructive device, he actually ends up bringing one that's actually very useful, this being a device that he actually deems known as Toolbox. With this device giving Deku pretty much the ability to kind of get out of any situation, as whenever he sees like a problem in front of him, the device is supposed to create a tool to actually get Deku out of that situation. With the only problem or real drawback about the device being the fact that Deku has to be the one to analyze the situation. But luckily, thanks to the fact that Deku thinks extremely fast, mostly because of the fact that he's able to absorb knowledge relatively quickly and analyze things very quickly, he's able to avoid situations and get past them extremely quickly, actually resulting in Deku getting 3rd place throughout the rest of the obstacle course. He could have gotten 1st, but the thing is, Deku was not aiming to get even more popular. But still, Deku ended up getting quite a large amount of popularity nonetheless, as after all, he did come in 3rd place. Not only that, but he was also very well known. Another interesting thing that actually ended up happening was actually the fact that Deku and Bakugo had a reunion. As Bakugo, after finding out that Deku got 3rd place and actually remembering who Deku was, immediately felt insulted, as he rushes over at Deku and begins to talk down to him, asking why he even came to UA, even though he's quirkless. And Deku, after hearing this, does the same thing he did as a kid, ignored Bakugo. And this once again pissed Bakugo off, but before he can get into a fight, the next portion of the exams were starting up. Now I'm actually going to skim through this portion of the exams, mostly because of the fact that it really doesn't play that much of an important role. And the thing is, Deku's team actually does remain the same, with the only difference here being the fact that Uraraka is actually swapped out for Melissa. With another thing to take note of being the fact that Deku throughout this entire time of taking this portion of the exams, he was actually mostly focusing on Melissa. Although his team still in the passing just like they do in the main timeline, the only real thing that actually ended up catching Deku's attention is the fact that Melissa seems to be kind of holding something back. Now, not only that, but she's also seemed to be acting a little bit different throughout the rest of the time here. As she seems to be kind of tense, not only that, but the device that she brought were kind of weird. As she brought 2 bracelets that were red, but whenever they activate, they kind of surround her entire arm. But before Deku can actually see what she does with these things, it usually would happen in an instant. So he kind of has no idea what exactly was going on. Or at least he didn't know until finally the very last portion of the exams would kick off. As we end up changing our attention to the arena, we see Deku end up walking as his very first opponent would be none other than Shinso. Now, when they both end up facing off against each other, instead of Shinso insulting Deku for having a quirk, he instead begins to talk down to Deku, thinking that because of the fact that he technically was in a higher level, like in a higher course level than Deku, that he might be able to get under Deku's skin. But the thing is, Shinso forgot one very important thing, and it was the simple fact that Deku in this timeline is the epitome about not giving a fuck. He really does not care about what exactly Shinso has to say. So he does the most simple thing ever and activates his toolbox, and when he does, he actually ends up pulling out a gun. Surprising everyone since they actually thought that Deku was gonna kill Shinso, but instead when Deku ends up firing the gun, it's instead just a simple dart that ends up putting Shinso to sleep. As technically with Shinso asleep, Deku can just simply walk over to him and, toss him out the arena. As now that Shinso had been knocked out and tossed out the arena, Deku is now declared the winner. Surprising everyone, as they didn't even know if they should cheer for it or even call it a fight, since really it was just one guy talking trash with the other guy just putting him to sleep and tossing him out the arena. But nonetheless, we had to move on forward with the rest of the matches as we see things play out pretty similarly until we eventually end up seeing Melissa's fight, as her fight would actually end up replacing Uraraka's fight with Bakugo. But the thing is though, is the fact that we actually end up seeing something very interesting. As during the fight, when Bakugo and Melissa face off, they're both very serious and not even talking to each other, until suddenly Melissa would then activate the bracelets in her arms, forming a red gauntlet on both. As we see her take in a deep breath before suddenly she begins to charge up. Lightning begins to spark all around her body as she begins to actually release golden lightning all around her. As in her mind she'll be screaming, "One for all, 5%. And immediately after hearing this, Melissa begins to take off as she shows off her superior speed, with Bakugo actually being caught off guard by this, as she ends up nailing Bakugo with a powerful punch to the stomach before he begins to retaliate. We see both of them going at it blow for blow while everyone else in the crowd begins to cheer. While Deku begins to look at her and just begins to analyze everything, as he realized that Melissa may have already unlocked a quirk. Either it had been hidden throughout this entire time, that or something else. As Deku tries to connect the dots and find out how exactly this even happened. As the fight between Melissa and Bakugo will continue going off, eventually Bakugo begins to get very frustrated about it as he begins to land explosions all around, dealing more damage to Melissa. As Melissa in retaliation actually begins to power up even further, as she goes all the way up to 10%. But this actually begins to cause her body to ache quite badly, mostly because of the fact that she still has not mastered it enough to that point. But it was a necessary power boost as she was able to actually land some very powerful blows on Bakugo and nearly knock him out the entire arena. But Bakugo was still able to retain and actually get back in there, as by this time once again both of them are just slugging at each other, going blow for blow, until eventually it was finally time for the final impact. As you see Bakugo charging up his explosions, with Melissa charging up her own attack, they will then rush at each other as Bakugo does a Howitzer impact, while Melissa charges up a full 100% Detroit smash. As both attacks end up colliding with each other, with both Midnight as well as Colossal having to step in order to prevent any more damage. Well, by the time the smoke had finally cleared, we actually end up seeing that the fight ended in a draw, as Melissa will be there currently right now slammed into the very wall of the arena and she'll be heavily damaged. While Bakugo will be out of the arena but conscious as he ends up looking at what just happened in complete shock, not able to believe it. But Deku did not give a fuck about anything that happened with Bakugo as he immediately rushed over to Melissa, as when he does, he immediately begins to activate Toolbox to get a medkit, as he tries his best to kind of patch her up immediately and also take her to Recovery Girl. Melissa tries to tell Deku that she was fine, but she knew herself that she was lying. As soon after this, we eventually end up getting the final matchup, this being none other than Deku facing off against Todoroki, with Melissa actually stating to Deku that right after this match that she would actually explain to him exactly how she got this quirk, with Deku agreeing to it. As after this, we get the fight between Deku and Todoroki. Now Todoroki does this simple attack of just sending a generous amount of ice to Deku, thinking that the fight was going to be over, with Deku immediately activating his toolbox to bring out a very powerful and amped up flamethrower to burn away all the ice. And Todoroki, seeing this, will get annoyed as he tries to attack Deku once again, but once again Deku does the same thing. We see both of them shooting out respective attacks at each other, or probably more or less Todoroki sending out respective attacks at Deku, with Deku just simply like destroying all the attacks that he sends at him, all the way to the point where Todoroki's body would actually be freezing up. Then when Deku sees this, he just simply ends up scoffing, as he could already tell that Todoroki was holding back, but the thing is, that was none of his business. As Todoroki actually seeing himself beginning to get tired, he actually begins to explain to Deku that he was not going to lose this fight. As he begins to try to go on a whole rant as to why he couldn't lose, this is when Deku, in the most surprising way ever, does something surprising, as he ends up screaming to Todoroki that he does not give a fuck, as he ends up walking over and actually punching Todoroki in the face, causing him to be slammed down to the arena. As everyone ends up looking at this and surprised, as Todoroki just looks shocked at just being hit like that, we see Deku, in a complete shocking turn of events, simply turn around and walk out the arena, as everyone just simply looks at him in shock as they begin to yell out in uproar, as he couldn't believe that after all this struggling, or more or less all of these attacks that Todoroki sent at him, that he was the one who eliminated himself. With Deku pretty much explained that the main reason he did this is that his girlfriend is going to tell him a secret and he wants to hear it. That's it. Forcing everyone to reel back as they actually saw Deku showing such levels of disrespect, as well as the audacity to just simply walk out on the UA Sports Festival and act like it was no big deal at all. As Deku eventually ends up returning, Melissa will be there, as even though she was disappointed in Deku, the way he actually like disqualified himself was very funny, as she was actually giggling about the whole thing, as both of them end up just making jokes about the whole thing, all the while Melissa actually begins to explain to Deku exactly how she got her quirk. Which was a good thing, considering the fact that right after this discussion, we actually see All Might walk into the room to check on Melissa, as this is the very first time that both All Might and Deku would truly get acquainted with each other, as basically All Might is basically a relative for Melissa. And either way, after an introduction between the two of them got out of the way, they're soon able to just move past the UA Sports Festival, as finally it would conclude with Todoroki being the first place winner, Tokoyami coming in second place, and surprisingly Deku coming in third place, with both Bakugo and Melissa sharing the fourth place title, since Bakugo had lost, before the semifinals, which this actually came to a very huge shocker to Bakugo, because he couldn't believe that he wasn't even in the top 3. As this harsh reality was actually set upon Bakugo, as he's now forced to revisualize everything, as he just tries to make sense of how this could even happen, as he would just be there standing there looking at his hands with a dazed look, all while Melissa and Deku would just continue on, as we now move past the UA Sports Festival. Now you see, behind the scenes, while the UA Sports Festival had came to an end, we actually see someone reviewing the footage, this being none other than Shigaraki. Now you see, Shigaraki was making sure to pay extra attention to it, as throughout the entire sports festival, he saw multiple different things. But the one thing that really caught his attention was Izuku Midoriya. As you see, the thing is, Izuku, the way he had used the device, that being toolbox, and the way that it just seemed to work for every situation, it made Shigaraki precisely remember the same invention that 13 used to wipe out his entire forces and also kill off his Nomu that was meant to beat All Might. So immediately understanding that this kid probably has been one of them, or maybe, just maybe, may have been the person to be behind everything that caused his own defeat, this made Shigaraki immediately begin to look up more information on Izuku Midoriya. As moving past these events, we now turn to when it was finally time for the internship for Class 1A, as well as many others in the hero course. Now you'll see, this will be a very brief phenomenon for everyone, as they do the same thing like they do in the main timeline, going to their respective tutors. But you see, the thing is, there will be a slight difference here, as thanks to the fact that once again Izuku is not part of Class 1A, he doesn't have to kind of go to the same internships as they do. Instead, they're actually looking for investors in the support course, as after all, if they have investors funding their work, then basically they're able to do anything. And the funniest thing was the fact that Deku got multiple people willing to invest in his projects, as his device, the toolbox, was extraordinary. After all, it could be so useful, especially to regular citizens, those who don't have a quirk. And just imagine what it could do for those that do have a quirk. So basically, they already saw a lot of potential in Deku and want to pretty much invest in him, which was not really much of a surpriser, as the one who was actually the very top donor in this investment for Deku was none other than Melissa's father, David Shield, which also, unsurprisingly, he'll be doing the same thing for his daughter as well, as he wanted to support the two, which wasn't really that surprising, as we also see soon afterwards that David Shield would offer an internship to Deku, as this will be another way to extend his apprenticeship, as after all, Deku is learning from David Shield, supposedly. At least that's what David Shield thinks, as Deku himself already knows everything and knows it better than David Shield, but regardless, he decides to accept it, mostly because of the fact that his mother told him to, and also Melissa. Unfortunately though, Melissa will not be going, as instead, she's actually going to Gran Torino, as she'll be switching with the main timeline Deku when it comes to getting training from Gran Torino, as she's the one that has One For All, and she's the one that needs to learn how to use it. And although her devices are helping her, she still needs to just get a little bit more training when it comes to using One For All. So due to that, she's going with Gran Torino, which makes Deku even more reluctant to go to David Shield, but thanks to the pleading of both Melissa as well as his mother, he ends up going regardless. As the very last thing we end up seeing before we do a time skip being Deku, of course saying goodbye to his mother, as well as putting up the defenses to the house, but he's pretty sure that nothing bad is going to happen. While at the same time, he also says goodbye to Melissa, as they end up parting ways for quite a while. As after that, we now do a time skip. So we're now time skipping to the very end of the internship, as Deku throughout the entire time was just honestly trying to keep his boredom at bay, as half the time he will be there to tell David Shield how to improve things, or just kind of sneakily giving him hints. As if he did that bluntly, then of course David Shield would ask him multiple different questions, and that would get annoying. So basically, the internship showed no purpose at all except for having Deku teach David Shield about how to do his job better, with David Shield actually making his inventions way better and turning his island even more advanced. As now that we're done with that brief explanation, we can now continue on with the story, as we see Deku soon land after the flight, as he will actually be there waiting for his mom to come pick him up, but for some strange reason she wasn't there. This caused Deku to raise an eyebrow, but he shrugs it off, as he ends up just simply calling an Uber and just heading off back to his house, so where when he ends up arriving there, he walks into the room and just collapses on the bed, as he was really tired. But you see, this is where we now do a small miniature time skip to when it's finally the afternoon, about to be nighttime actually. As you see, Deku ends up waking up, and when he does, he immediately feels something off. Now Deku begins walking around his entire house as he realizes his mother is not back from work, which was odd because she usually got back from work around afternoonish. So when he begins looking around and even begins calling up her number to see where she's at, this is when Deku didn't actually hear someone pick up the call that wasn't his mother. As we end up hearing a creepy tone coming from the phone, as well as whimpering from what Deku assumes to be his mother, we hear a man then state to Deku, "Welcome home." As immediately after hearing this, Deku's phone nearly cracked by as much force as he was putting on it, as this is when he begins talking in a very cruel and dark tone, asking just who was it. But instead of hearing the answer, all he hears is some dark chuckling, as the man begins to pretty much explain where Deku can find him, giving him the exact address before hanging up the line, as Deku, with a cold and hollow look, would immediately begin to gather all the resources he had on hand as he begins to make his way to the location. Now we see Deku actually using some type of jetpack to actually fly over there to the location. He ends up arriving there at the nick of time before suddenly blasting through what seems to be a warehouse. As we end up turning our attention to see Deku then walk in there, deeming multiple different devices, such as 2 blasters in each hand, with him also having a backpack that seems to sprout out multiple different arms that have also different varieties of weapons, as well as having 2 orbs that were floating behind him that seemed to act as some type of defense mechanism, as Deku will end up shouting out to whoever was in there to come out. And this is when we will then hear the slow clapping of a typical villain, to which Deku will point it out, As this when walking out would be a man in a suit. But the man was not just simply in a suit, he seems to also have some headgear. As along with the man was also Shigaraki and Kodagiri, and also Deku's mother. Deku will be looking at them as he begins to ask them in one simple tone, what was stopping him from killing them all right here, right now? Like literally, what was stopping him? And the man just simply smiles as he just simply brings up his hand straight to the face, making a shh sound. And when he does this is when Deku would then hear it. Static will be heard from all his devices as he immediately takes off the backpack and throws away the blasters as he sees every last one of his devices then shut down and seemingly be broken. As Deku ends up looking at them in complete shock, not able to believe it. As he tries to immediately try to fix it, this is when suddenly he would then be blasted away by an air cannon, with Deku not being able to do anything about it because he's quirkless right now. As the man begins to actually talk to Deku, saying that he actually caused him as well as his subordinate here some troubles. As Shigaraki will begin to walk over to Deku, scratching his face sporadically, telling Deku that he's been waiting to meet him. Deku will be there looking at Shigaraki and the rest of them coldly, but at the same time he'll be trying to analyze everything in a panic. He tries to find a quick way out of here as well as a way to rescue his mother without her getting hurt in the least. As he doesn't care what happens to him, all he cares about is making sure that she was fine. As we now continue on with the scene, as we see Deku just staring down at the villains as they begin to pretty much monologue, or more precisely, the man in the suit, which he ends up revealing that his name or his identity is actually All For One. As he begins to pretty much talk to Deku, trying to manipulate him and try to make him see things in his perspective, before finally actually trying to extend an offer to Deku, as he actually offers Deku a quirk, stating that he sees potential and use in Deku, and he says that Deku can fulfill everything he desires as long as he's working for him, and he can even gain a quirk, something that he assumed that Deku would so desperately want. But when Deku heard this, he does something that surprises Shigaraki and Kodagiri, as Deku just simply spits directly at All For One's face, telling him to go fuck himself. And when All For One heard this, as Shigaraki would actually rush over to try to attack Deku, All For One would actually just simply stretch a hand out as he tells Deku that all that intelligence was wasted on him. As this is when he then walks over to Deku's mother, who was crying, as this is when he would then end up taking her away, with Deku getting angrier, telling him to stop, but he doesn't listen. As All For One tells Deku that as an adult, he needs to learn that his actions have consequences. As Deku will be there watching his mother helplessly as she's taken away to a dark room. As we end up doing a miniature time skip, moving towards multiple hours, or heck, maybe even days, Deku will be there just staring aimlessly about what he just saw, as he literally saw his mother taken away by the man and doesn't even know what happened to her. Anything could possibly happen to her, and he doesn't like the fact that he doesn't even know what it was. He doesn't like the idea of not even knowing what could have happened to her. He's supposed to be smart. He's supposed to be able to have a solution for this. Yet so far, everything he's seen has been helpless. For some weird reason, what he's assuming is a quirk, all his devices are offline, and whenever he tries to activate them, they just deactivate immediately. As it must be some type of quirk that messes with his devices, to which he hated it. As he hated the feeling of being so weak, so helpless. As once again, he just questions what was the good of all this intelligence when it did nothing to help him, or more precisely, help the people he cared about. As Deku begins to wonder this is when we will then see All For One then return back, as he ends up laughing and chuckling at the kind of hopeless expression that Deku was wielding. As he ends up chuckling, telling Deku that that look was pathetic, we see Deku not responding at all, as All For One will make his taunt, basically telling Deku that things could go better for him if he just simply accepts his offer. But Deku remains quiet. As All For One will continue going on for a couple more attempts, he begins to get disappointed, as he then simply tells Deku that he's a disappointment, and honestly that he was a failure. As he begins to walk away, thinking that that was just it for this so-called prodigy once in a lifetime, this is when suddenly he would then hear Deku spring into action. As he turns around, only to see Deku holding in one of the orbs that were deactivated. But the thing is, multiple wirings were covering it, and it was glowing dangerously. All For One tries to activate his quirk, or tries to use it to deactivate the device, but this is when he then gets caught off guard, as that's exactly what Deku wanted. as Deku ended up screaming at him, cursing him out. This is when Deku would then throw the device directly into All For One's face, as it reveals to be a bomb. As this bomb would be so powerful that it actually ends up blowing up a large portion of the warehouse, as Deku actually ends up looking at the sky to reveal that it's actually about to be the very next day, as the sun was actually about to rise. As Deku ends up seeing the opportunity, as he ends up looking around for All For One, only to see the man there trying to recover from the damage he had just taken, as his suit was now damaged, his face looking worse for wear, as well as the headgear being damaged as well. Now mind you, this All For One is not as powerful as the one that fought All Might in the 3rd season, as he does not have the endurance that he had during that fight to endure this attack. And Deku, seeing this, will seize the opportunity as he ends up grabbing the backpack with all the different arms, as well as one of the blasters that he had left behind, as he rushes over to the location where his mother was taken in. Now when Deku ends up entering the area, he ends up seeing a bunch of pods, as every single one of them seemed to hold some type of brain within them. Which another thing that Deku ends up noticing is the fact that some of the pods were actually damaged from the attack that he released earlier. But unfortunately right now, Deku did not care for any of that, as he was still looking for his mother. And he did eventually find her. But when he found her, she was in one of the pods and she had a hollow look on her face, which made Deku immediately panic. Using the blaster, he blasts open the pod as he ends up taking his mother, and using the backpack, he generates an entire jetpack as he uses it to fly off, leaving All For One as well as the damaged warehouse behind, as thanks to the explosion, it already caused a fire at the warehouse, causing it to gather a large amount of attention, as heroes will already be rushing to the area. As we end up doing a time skip. So we now flash forward to the point where we see Deku at the hospital, as right now he will be there just sitting down in the waiting room, as he looks down at the ground with an aimless look, not even thinking about anything at this very moment, as he felt lost. As Deku was like this for quite a while, this when suddenly the doors would then open, as walking out of his mother's room will be none other than Nezu, Aizawa, All Might, a detective, and even a doctor, as all of them end up walking out with every single one of them discussing something, with Aizawa soon telling the doctor to leave, as he, as well as the rest of the heroes as well as the detective, would rush over to Deku. This is when Deku ends up looking at them with an aimless look, as Nezu, being the most mature out of all of them, would actually walk forward to Deku as he gives him the sad news, as unfortunately Midoriya's mother lost her quirk, and this kind of put her into shock. She's going to be in this coma-like state for quite a while, but she will be able to make a full recovery soon. And when Deku heard this, he just was lost. He couldn't believe it. As he tries to comprehend anything, he just couldn't make sense of the whole thing. Why? He didn't do anything. Literally, he was just minding his own business. Sure, he made devices to make the world a safer place, but that was it. And you're telling me that was a bad thing? And how did the world repay him? By making his mother's quirkless? Putting her into a semi-coma? Now, Deku already understood that right now what he was doing is trying to blame someone, but the truth is Deku knew that this was on him. And that's what he hated more than anything else. What was the good of this intelligence if he wasn't able to protect the very person that he cares about most in this world? As Deku ends up looking down with a dark look on his face, just trying to comprehend something. Unfortunately, right now, he couldn't focus on it too much, considering the fact that the detective, Nezu, All Might, all of them had questions for Deku, to which he had no choice but to answer. There was really nothing else that could be done. As flashing forward after all these questioning was done, as all of them would leave Deku alone for a little while, with every single one of them just giving Deku some words of comfort, but the thing is they were having no effect. Deku did not care for any of them. As Deku was looking down with an aimless look on his face, this was suddenly running through the hallways of the hospital. Deku would hear footsteps as he ended up looking up, only to be hugged by none other than Melissa. As she immediately begins to comfort Deku, all while Deku will be there for quite a while before finally realizing who she was, as it will be the very first time we actually end up hearing Deku break down, as he begins crying for the very first time in his entire life. Not even as a child Deku cried, but this was the very first time. As Deku ends up breaking down, as he begins to explain that this was all his fault, Melissa will be there to comfort him, telling him that everything was going to be alright. But Deku knew better. He knew better. That the only way for something like this to be right was only if he was the one to make it right. As with that thought in mind, we now do a time skip. Moving past these events, we see Deku taking a different approach to everything. His workflow has been doubled, maybe even tripled, as the way Deku was building inventions, he was doing it as if it was just second nature to him. And not only that, but he was doing it in record timing, creating different devices for different purposes. And along that time, Deku also decided to take up on David Shield's investment, but not only him, but multiple different others, as Deku begins to actually make negotiation deals and everything, as many people were funding Deku, with Deku giving them added benefits. Whether it be the fact that someone needed to get more security for the house, Deku will build it for them. In exchange, they give him more money. As Deku was making sure to put all this money to good use, building more and more inventions, and making himself even more powerful. Another thing Deku was doing was making sure to fix that one mistake, that being the fact that there are quirks out there that can tamper with his own technology. He made sure to find a counter for that immediately, as he was not going to let something like that happen again. Not ever. As we see Deku make multiple different improvements as well as multiple different changes in rapid timing. As well as he was not the only one, as Melissa was also doing the same thing, as she was transferred also to the hero course, as she now has to do both support and hero course, which was good for her considering the fact she can keep working on her devices, and not only that but also training to become a hero. Not only that, but she was also learning how to master One For All, doing way better than the original Deku was doing at this point, as instead of having only 5% being able to use it, she was actually already able to do 20%. Heck, even up all the way up to 40% if she actually had the technology or she had her support gear with her. So already she was making drastic improvements. As we now end up turning to the present, where we actually end up seeing Melissa going to the forest camp training, along with the rest of Class 1A. And Deku, after soon hearing this, and also kind of getting post-trauma from everything that happened with Inko, so due to that thought, he decided to actually give a hair clip to Melissa, to which at first she thought was just a regular one until Deku actually fully explained it to her. As this hair clip actually gave her pretty much two benefits. Number one being the fact that he gave her a force field, which was very powerful. And another thing was the fact that it also gave her a way to pretty much notify other heroes and also Deku if there was danger that was actually happening. And while of course she thought that Deku was being a little bit overprotective here, but also understanding that this was because of the fact about what happened with Inko, she decided to take it nonetheless and thank him. As after that, she tells Deku that she'll return to him quite safely, all while Deku just simply nods his head and continues on with his investments as well as continue building different devices. As we now do a change of scenes, as well as a time skip. Now skimming through the story, we eventually turn to when the villains start attacking the camp, as all around chaos is happening. We see when that chaos was happening, already an alert was being sent out to nearby heroes, as multiple different calls will be made as it will be explaining the events in a robotic tone. But you see, we now turn to the most important person that got this alert, this being Deku. As when he got this alert, he immediately got up as he knew that it was finally time. The time to finally begin making things right. As this is where we now do a change of scenes. Now turning to the forest training camp, we see Melissa running through the forest, as right now she had just recently beat up Muscular, which wasn't really that difficult for her, as she ended up being way stronger than the main timeline Deku at this point. And instead of using 5%, she's using 20%. So that means she's actually able to win against Muscular much easier with less damage. And not only that, but she also got coded as safety. Also, another thing that actually ends up happening is the fact that thanks to the fact that she got way less damage from the fight against Muscular, also because of the fact that she has higher mastery over One For All than Deku or the original had at this point, this means that she's able to actually help them way more. As she was able to help out in taking care of the other villains that were facing off against the Pussycats, while at the same time she also ran around telling everyone much earlier that they're actually allowed to use their quirks, thanks to Aizawa's authorization. But you see, during this time, she eventually ends up meeting up with Tokoyami, who's going on a rampage, and soon afterwards ends up meeting Bakugo as well as Todoroki, to which they both end up actually helping when it comes to calming down Tokoyami. But you see, during this time though, eventually after hashing out a plan and moving around, they eventually end up realizing that both Bakugo as well as Tokoyami got captured by Mr. Compass, to which this ends up causing Melissa to actually try to help out. And once again, thanks to her higher mastery over One For All, she actually ends up getting them back much quicker, allowing Tokoyami as well as Bakugo to be released. But this ends up causing some more difficulties down the line. As the villains now realizing that they underestimated their enemy just a little bit, they decide to actually apply a little bit more power and a little bit more force, with the main threat here being Dabi, as his flames were actually making it pretty difficult to breathe, even though Todoroki as well as Melissa were trying their best to kind of make sure to kind of calm them down, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough. And just when it seems as if things were actually about to look bleak, this is when suddenly a futuristic sound would then be heard, as suddenly Melissa ended up looking up only to see multiple different blue spirals beginning to open up all around the entire force training camp. As suddenly we will then see a generous swarm of robots end up actually swarming out of these portals that opened up, as every single one of them will be deeming a logo with the letter M on top of every single one of their chests. As finally, after every last one of them end up arriving, they immediately begin to pull all the stops out, pretty much extinguishing the flames and basically making sure to kind of immediately protect all the students that were all around. And as Melissa ends up taking a look at this was suddenly the main and the most ginormous portal that was there would then end up seeing someone actually coming out of it. As currently right now, this person was deeming on a white and blue suit, as well as the fact that he seemed to have multiple different nanobite technology all around him. It will be none other than Deku, as he finally decided to make his appearance known, as this was the beginning of the big change. Most will be there watching all this in shock, as Dabi, seeing this, would immediately begin to shoot flames at Deku, who, without even looking, just simply ends up summoning out a force field that blocks the attack, as he looks at Dabi before scoffing. Now Dabi tries once again, but as he does, this is when suddenly he ends up feeling himself get tased, or kind of get electrocuted all around, as he is unable to move and actually ends up collapsing to the ground. And he was not the only one, as twice Mr. Compass and even Toga tries to help in. Unfortunately, they all end up suffering the same fate. As Melissa ends up taking a good look at them to try to understand what just happened, this is when she realized that there were already small miniature nanobots that were on them. And these nanobots were sending a constant stream of electricity throughout their bodies, preventing them from even activating their quirks. As Deku ends up finally floating down to the ground, he ends up actually deactivating the suit, which was actually made up of a bunch of liquefied nanobots that just simply ended up turning into a small little watch that was on his arm. As Melissa ends up looking at this, we see Deku pull her into a hug, really happy that he got here just in time. Well, not just in time, but at least enough to the point where she didn't get seriously hurt from fighting. As after that, this is when suddenly other heroes begin to arrive on the scene, and unlike in the main timeline where Kodagiri would actually try to help them and save them, unfortunately they already could tell that they were far out of reach. So with that thought, unfortunately Dabi, Toga, Mr. Compass, Twice, and the other two are all captured, including Muscular. As with that will be the end of the Forest Training Camp, and the very beginning of Deku's big change. As moving past all these events, we actually end up seeing that after the Forest Training Camp, there were no casualties at all. As with Deku's arrival as well as his immediate interference, this caused a big change of things. But this also caused some troubles as well. Because you see, the thing is, what Deku did, that technically could be called the fact that he actually did heroism, even though he was not a licensed hero. He was not even part of the hero course. But the thing is, they couldn't do anything about it. And the main reason why is because there really was no law for those that were quirkless to do heroism, as only those that really had quirks would get in trouble for it. But Deku is quirkless. And not only that, but they haven't really made too many laws for those that are quirkless anymore, and removed many that used to exist, mostly because of the fact that, well, when Hero Society began to take full notice of quirks and everything, they kind of just assumed that quirkless people are just going to do basic things. At the end of the day, they were not real threats at all, or at least that's what they thought before Izuku Midoriya came into play. As thanks to all these flaws in the system, this actually allowed Deku to get away scot-free. And to make it even better is the fact that Deku did not stop afterwards, as immediately Deku begins to continue on with his investors, making more and more products for them while they continue supplying him with more money. And not only that, but Deku also decides to open up when it comes to doing a business with his inventions. As once again, although he's not impressed with his intelligence, and although he long lost his passion for science, he saw the uses in them, and he was going to make full use of it. Another thing that actually ended up happening after these events was also the fact that Melissa and Deku decided to have a conversation, where she honestly was really happy to see what Deku was doing, but wanted to ask a genuine question. Why now? Deku could have done all this way earlier. She already caught on to that fact many years earlier. And I mean way before even the UA Sports Festival or even them entering UA. So she wanted to know why at this very moment did Deku decide for this to even happen. And the main reason why is because of the fact that Deku, after what happened with Inko, he just simply could not afford it anymore. He already knew that he was smart, and he already knew he had so much intelligence, but what was the use of that intelligence if you're not able to keep the people you care about most in the world safe? And not only that, but there was also another thing that was bugging Deku a lot. And it was the exact words that All For One told him. That being the fact that all that intelligence was wasted on Deku, and that he was a failure, a disappointment. As he still remembers how helplessly he was when All For One actually took away his mother to remove her quirk. So with that thought in mind, Deku made sure to never feel that way again. And he went through drastic measures to do that, literally breaking through multiple laws of science to create literal portal travel. Now mind you, it's not to the extent that Rick had it just yet, as after all it's still in the early stages, but basically the way it works has the same fundamentals, this being the fact that as soon as Deku ends up knowing a location, he's basically able to open the portal to that very location, all the way, and at least on the face of planet Earth at least. But soon Deku already can see investments of pushing it even further. And so far the only way that Deku can really do it right now is if he's in the complete suit that he had earlier, as he can only do it when he has the nano suit on, as with that he has complete control over all the robots, he can spam multiple different portals, and basically he's practically invincible when he's like that. As now that I'm done explaining that, we can now continue on with the story. As moving forward after these events, we see things kick into overdrive when it comes to Deku. As all around the entirety of Japan, the devices that Deku has been making has been appearing much more frequently. As not only did it actually come with the heroes that were actually working there, as most of the Deku's devices were in almost every hero's toolkit pretty much, but that was not the only thing. As you see, Deku's devices actually took things on a further level, as people even began to see Deku's robots roam the city. And you see, this will actually be due to the fact that Deku made an agreement with UA. Basically, after everything that happened at the Forest training camp, and with Deku actually bringing up quite a good case after all, as he was able to analyze the entire situation, how everything went wrong, and basically point out all these flaws to the hero agency, they decided to make Deku an agreement pretty much. As basically, Deku's inventions have already proved to be quite useful, not even quite, incredibly useful. So with that thought in mind, they decided to pretty much give Deku a deal. Basically, if he continues supplying them with the right amount of technology and resources to keep people safe, then they will also be the ones funding him. As that just made Deku's pockets go up even more. As by this point, basically Deku has not one, not two, but basically more than even 10 investors just continuously supplying him with money, as he continues bringing about changes all around the entirety of Japan, and soon even further. As already people begin to see like these different robots that are there, whenever an incident would occur with a villain, these robots would either A, prevent destruction from all around, basically forming up a ginormous barrier around the entire area, preventing all that destruction from damaging any nearby buildings or any nearby citizens. Or on the other hand, they would just simply activate and completely take down the villain before he even gets a chance to act, allowing them to pretty much go about the entire mess without really any problems at all, or any fight. And this will actually cause the hero's job to be way easier, but also cause quite a few issues. As you see, with the villains being taken care of much easier, that means there were much less chances for heroes really being needed. As more and over time, heroes actually begin to slowly decline, which was something that was beginning to be caught up by the hero agency. But the thing is, was it really a bad thing? I mean, after all, people are being saved now. And not only that, but they're doing a way better job of it thanks to Deku's help. So was it really a bad thing? But you see, this ended up causing quite a few problems, as already there have been mutters about a protest against these things, as even though they're doing a good job, they're basically taking the job of someone else. Basically, they're replacing the heroes. So already conflict was arising. But the thing was, Deku did not care. He didn't care about none of that. As you see, the main things of these devices were to fulfill a purpose that Deku was planning to do ever since he was a kid, and also after what happened to his mother. Number one, it was to fulfill that little bucket list of his, that being to keep the world safe and everything and prevent the incidents from happening in the first place. But also, it was meant to pretty much scan and find out who or where Shigaraki was hiding. Because if he finds Shigaraki, then he can find All For One. As Deku would actually always have that little nano suit that he had, the little portals always on hand. as pretty much this actually allowed Deku to have 24/7 surveillance, always being updated on information, and basically let him know when something was about to happen and how exactly to take it down. So basically, just to say it in the most simple terms, Deku was basically the entire internet all compact into one person, as he knew multiple amounts of different information that were way beyond the point of just being simply human. As after all, he truly had gained the title of being the smartest man, not even the smartest thing in the world right now. As we now end up moving forward once again, a few more things actually end up happening, with number one being the fact that finally Midoriya's mother finally gets out of the hospital. And when she does, Deku is really happy, as he immediately actually ends up crafting a device to which he gives it to her. And although Inko has told Deku multiple times that she does not need this, Deku was desperate about it. He honestly begged her pretty much to actually have this device with her all the time, as this device was pretty much the same device that he wore all the time. It was the liquefied nanobites, with them taking the form of a necklace for Inko. And as you see, the main reason why Deku wanted her to have this was for an extra layer of defense, as these ones were way better than the defense he gave her earlier, as he felt himself being completely stupid for not even giving Inko a level of defense at all, as the only defense she had was a house. But if she was out in public, then he now fully understands how exactly Shigaraki, Kodogiri, and even All For One were able to capture her. But now he's not making that same mistake. As not only that, but this was basically better than her quirk, as this gave her the ability of having a force field, as well as the fact that they actually allow her the added benefit of basically doing anything as long as she thinks of it. The force field, though, was something that activates pretty much either on her command or whenever the first sign of danger is approaching. So basically, Inko is protected 24/7. As now with that being said, we can now move on from this, as we now do a change of scenes. Now we now turn to All For One's perspective, as right now he was stressing, like really stressing by this point, as thanks to the developments that Deku has been making, it's been way harder to snatch away more quirks. As you see, thanks to these robots happening all around, his grunts can't get any work done. And to make it even worse is the fact that his latest project, this being none other than Shigaraki, hasn't been able to get away with his whole League of Villains, as the whole League of Villains has been taken away not once but twice now. As he tries his best to think of a plan as a way to get back control over everything once again, this is when he will then be given some valuable information from one of his workers, as we would then see a cruel smirk once again appear on All For One's face. As this is where we now change scenes. Now, turning to Melissa's point of view pretty much, we see things going very well for her, as by now, Deku has been making drastic improvements of course, and things have been changing, but she's actually enjoying these changes. As you see, the thing is, at the end of the day, Deku is helping out people, and she's actually really happy for him. And not only that, but everyone in the hero chorus is also getting along pretty well, except for Bakugo, as you know, Bakugo is still being him, but this time he's actually being way more humble, as that fight against Melissa really taught him humility in some type of way, although he's still striving to be the number one hero, of course. And that was not the only thing, as soon afterwards, Class 1A actually had to do the hero's license exams, to which I'm just going to skip over this and just say the exact same results that happened in the main timeline happened in this one, except replace Deku with Melissa, as once again, Class 1A is actually doing really good, while the only ones really failing being none other than Todoroki and Bakugo for their own reasons. As soon afterwards, moving past these events, we also get all of Class 1A facing off against Mirio, one of the members of the Big Three, to which Mirio defeats every last one of them, although he did get quite a bit of a challenge from Todoroki, Bakugo, as well as Melissa. As thanks to the fact of all that training, Melissa actually amped up how much percentage she has control over, as without the devices, she's actually able to go all the way up to 30% now. So she's already making extremely good progress. And with the devices, well, she actually goes straight up to 80. As she, once again, not only did her mastery of her quirk go up, but also her mastery when it comes to just inventing things, as she once again got help from Deku and also from her father. But you see, moving on to the current point right now, this being the point where it would actually be during Melissa's internship with Night Eye, and by this point, she had just encountered Eri along with Mirio, as during this time they also met up with Overhaul, but unfortunately couldn't do anything at the moment. Now it'll be during this event. As you see, when Shiosaki ends up going back with Eri and basically already beginning to do his experiments and everything, this is when he actually ends up meeting up with someone. But instead of meeting up with Shigaraki as well as Kodagiri, he instead ends up meeting up with the very man himself, this being All For One. Now you see, when he ends up meeting him, Shiosaki of course is very hesitant, as he has no idea exactly how to go about things and already knows that, well, of course, All For One is very dangerous, as he even prepares to use physical force if needed. But you see, the thing is, actually, All For One has a better agenda in mind. And he says that if Shiosaki helps him with this one, then he would actually end up supplying him with as much resources as he needs. To which when Shiosaki heard this, he immediately was on board. As with that, we hear All For One then talk about the deal they just made. Now see, moving forward from these events, all the way to the point where Melissa would actually begin her rush through the entire base of Overhaul, along with Mirio, a couple of heroes, and even robots that Deku had made himself, as these robots were making sure to keep the damage to a minimum, as well as taking care of any villains that were kind of grunt workers, leaving the main boss monsters for the heroes, of course. And Deku would be there making sure to observe everything, making sure to step in at any moment if Melissa were to get in too much danger, or if she were to be at a point where she needed assistance. But you see, as this was happening though, and as Deku was making sure to keep an eye on everything, he begins to realize something. This being the fact that one of his robots were actually destroyed. As he begins to actually realize that he's beginning to lose visual, he immediately begins to actually open up a portal and actually opens up at the very location where Shiosaki's base was getting overrun, as he immediately deems the nanobot suit and just rushes in there. Now when he begins rushing in there, going through multiple different amount of bases and actually destroying all the grunts that were there, Deku begins to actually analyze certain things. This being the fact that number one, he no longer can find signs of Melissa. And number two was the fact that a large portions of the heroes there were actually knocked out, as the main one that was truly fighting at this very moment was Mirio. And unfortunately, Mirio had already lost his quirk at the moment after getting shot by a quirk destroying bullet. Now Deku did not like this at all, as he immediately rushes over to the location where Mirio is, and when he does, he immediately ends up using his nanobots to create a barrier, protecting Mirio as well as Eri from any more damage. Now Shiosaki continues attacking this over and over again, continues making himself more buff and everything, but Deku was not paying attention to him at all. More or less, he was questioning Mirio about what happened. And that's where Mirio begins to explain the events. As during the time when Mirio was hunting down Eri, it all happened in a flash. As one moment they were all running down in order to save Eri, all the while Deku's robots were taking care of everything, until suddenly they end up hearing a loud explosion. Now it ended up coming from behind them as they all end up looking, and when they do, all they see is just this enormous wave of black smoke just filling in the area. But as they were wondering this though, this is when suddenly they'll then hear the shout of Shiosaki to do it now. As just as they were trying to make sense of the situation, all they hear is a loud blast coming and approaching them. As so far only Mirio was the only one to react down time, making sure to activate his quirk to kind of phase through the explosion, but still he could literally just sense the destruction that happened. As soon after using his phasing quirk, he immediately begins to look around, and when he does, he sees it. All the heroes are laid out completely basically, as only a few of them were left standing until they were taken down by, well, the grunts that are working for Overhaul. And so far Overhaul was the one that was there looking completely fine. And to make it even worse is the fact that Melissa, this being the second person that was chasing after Eri along with Mirio, had completely disappeared. As after making sense of all these events and after understanding that, Deku once again got that look. The same look that he got when he found out that Inko was captured, he got the look again. And as Shiosaki was running his mouth once again, telling Deku that he has no right to intervene in this is when suddenly the nanobots that were actually forming a shield would then suddenly end up swarming Shiosaki as they begin wrapping around his entire body. As Shiosaki begins to call out to Deku, telling him what he's doing, this is when he ends up screaming out in pain as suddenly his arms would then suddenly be dislocated. Both of them. As he ends up falling down to the ground, breathing heavily, as right now he was still in a very distorted form since he used Overhaul on himself, we see Deku start walking towards him with a dark look on his face. Now this is when Deku then grabs Shiosaki by the neck as he makes sure to stare him directly in the eyes. And when he does, he ends up using the nanobots from the suit to make two floating blasters, each one of them aimed at Shiosaki's face. as Deku then speaks in the most coldest tone possible, "Where is Melissa?" As we now change scenes. Now currently right now in a dark room, we see Melissa, as right now she will be there in kind of a dazed state. She couldn't understand what exactly happened. As one moment she was really running to the base looking for Eerie, next minute an explosion was heard as well as black smoke, and then the next few minutes all she heard was Shiosaki telling someone like it was an hour or something, and next thing you know she just felt herself get hit by a force and fall unconscious. And when she wakes up, she's now here. Now once Melissa is finally able to snap out of the daze, she begins looking around, and when she does, she then begins to hear the voice of All For One. Now All For One begins actually walking towards her, as when she does, she immediately begins to try powering up her quirk, but realizing that she's unable to do so. As overall, seeing her curiosity as to why exactly this was happening, this is when he basically begins to explain that the very thing that was restraining her uses the same material that they use to kind of keep away criminals from activating their quirks. So basically, she's unable to activate her quirk as long as she's in those restraints. And when she hears this, she immediately begins to panic as she tries to think of a plan, but unfortunately, All For One has none of that, as he just simply ends up chuckling before flicking Melissa on the head. And when he does this, he actually ends up using a quirk along with it, causing it to do way more damage, as Melissa's head will be railing back as she ends up actually sprouting a pretty bad wound on her head. As he ends up chuckling at the fact of how she just seems to be nearly in a daze from that one blow, he basically begins to explain to her exactly why he did all this in typical villain monologue, pretty much explaining about the fact that he originally just simply decided to get her as a way to use it against Deku, but he never expected by finding her he would also find the next successor for One For All. As now that he was finally in close proximity of her, and actually now finally understanding all the information from her, it now made perfect sense. The daughter of David Shield, also someone who has close connection to All Might, and someone who for her entire life has been quirkless until a very certain moment. It all made sense. As he begins to pretty much comment about all this stuff, Melissa begins to ask him who was he, or more precisely, how did he even knew about her or All Might or even Deku, to which he basically begins to explain about the whole origins about him and All Might, and also what happened between him and Deku, and explaining about how he took away his mother's quirk and basically how things wound up how they are now. And when she heard all this, she was immediately pissed off as she tries to power up her quirk, but once again failed to do so. So all she's able to do is just simply growl angrily. Now everyone hears this as he just simply laughs and gets up into her face, as when he does, he begins actually talking down to her, pretty much doing the same thing that he did to Deku. Which was ironic, as the very same thing that happened to Deku actually happened once again. As this is when Melissa then smirks as she ends up spitting directly onto All For One's face, which ended up causing All For One to immediately frown as he wipes off the spit that was on his face using, of course, a napkin, and as he does, he ends up slamming a wind blast directly at Melissa, causing her to completely be knocked out. As he says that it was finally time for him to get what he's been desiring for so long, this being All For One, and also to kind of get payback on Deku. But you see, as All For One was actually about to go to the procedure of this, as we actually see him grabbing onto Melissa and actually taking her to the very same chambers that he did for, Deku's mom, this is when suddenly, immediately, portals begin to actually open up. Now, when he actually sees this, he's caught off guard until suddenly he actually ends up getting blasted by something, causing him to reel back from in shock, in pain, and multiple different other things. As we see a ginormous swirl of emotions just pouring through him, wondering how exactly this was happening. As suddenly we will then see Deku step in, with him having the same hollow and dark look that he had on his face. As All For One seeing Deku once again, he tries to make some witty banter, but unfortunately Deku was not having it, and seeing this, he tries to shoot off a wind blast directly at Deku's face, to which Deku just simply ends up blocking it, using the nanobots from his suit to create a barrier. As he ends up walking right through the blast, All For One ends up cursing as he immediately grabs onto Melissa and actually uses her as a shield, to which causes Deku to stop moving for a little bit. And seeing this, All For One begins to laugh as he tells Deku that even now he is still being so pathetic, as he thought that Deku being so smart would obviously see that All For One would do this. But you see, the thing is, All For One was right. Deku knew that he would do this, which is why he already had precautions. As just as All For One was doing this is when suddenly he would then feel himself be restrained by something. He couldn't move. As he tries to make sense of the whole situation, this is when he then realizes that there was probably a nanobite on him, something that was restraining his movements. And just as he was about to blow it off though, this is when suddenly already Melissa will be moved to safety. As Deku was just simply using his mind alone, he's able to command the nanobots to move her away to safety, pretty much allowing him and All For One to basically now be alone. As he ends up using the nanobots to send Melissa to the portal, getting her to safety, this left Deku alone with All For One, and finally allowing this all to come to an end. As All For One seeing this immediately powers up. He uses his quirk basically to its fullest potential, activating all the quirks that he had on him, and he tells Deku that all this could have been very simple if he just simply worked for him, if he just simply let him be, if he just simply did not exist. But instead of responding, Deku looks at All For One with a cold blank stare. As All For One seeing this gets pissed as he tells Deku that he can screw off, as he rushes at Deku using all the quirks that he had at his disposal to immediately try to bum rush him, kind of put him down immediately. But Deku seeing this coming just immediately pulls up a generous barrier, causing these attacks to do nothing to him. Now All For One ends up getting annoyed at this, but this is when suddenly Deku ends up grabbing him by the throat as he ends up suddenly flying up into the air along with All For One as they begin battling out in the skies. As All For One ends up telling Deku that all this was pointless since Deku stood no chance. He didn't actually have something that All For One had multiple of, this being quirks. These being the things that literally revolutionize life itself, pretty much making anyone who deems it a god. And basically he ends up telling Deku that he is never gonna be one. He will never be like any one of them. He's basically a failure, and no matter what Deku does, he can do nothing about it. This was supposed to be All For One's victory. But once again, Deku says nothing more, as they continue fighting it out in the sky, with All For One using as many quirks as he can. He even tries to use the same one he used earlier, this being the one that shut down all of Deku's technology, but by this point, Deku has advanced it enough to the point where it's basically unable to be tampered with by a quirk. As All For One continues fighting Deku, eventually Deku decides to just simply end it. As during the time of fighting All For One, both him and Deku then suddenly end up getting close to each other as they both end up fighting hand to hand, with All For One telling Deku that he was pathetic. But you see, during the time when this was happening though, unaware to All For One was the fact that Deku saw an opening and he took it. As eventually both of them end up separating from each other, All For One then asked Deku what's his next possible move here, considering the fact that it seems as if Deku was running out of ideas. And so far right now, All For One was still feeling invincible. There was no way he could lose, right? Or at least that's what he thought, until suddenly he actually ended up shutting down completely. At this, he feels himself then suddenly just stop activating his quirks as he ended up falling from the sky, literally free falling until suddenly Deku ends up grabbing him at the very last minute, literally just as he was about to hit the ground. All For One ends up realizing that he's unable to move anything from the neck down as he tries to make sense about what just happened until suddenly something forced its way out of All For One's mouth, as it will be the nanobots that Deku was having on him. This caused All For One to realize something. During the time of the clash when both All For One as well as Deku were fighting, Deku was slowly but surely actually feeding All For One miniature bits of the nanobites, the same nanobites that were making his suit. So basically, Deku was able to pretty much kind of make All For One a crippled. Literally, that's literally the entire point of the fight. He literally paralyzed All For One from the neck down. As All For One is unable to move at this very minute, this is when we then see Deku then look at him before actually asking him the very same thing he did when he actually first met All For One. That being the simple question, what was stopping him from just killing him right now? As for the very first time in All For One's life, he truly felt hopeless. As we now do a time skip as well as a change of scenes. Later on after these events, Deku eventually ended up returning back And when he did, immediately people began to like rush over to him, asking multiple different things. But right now, Deku had to turn in All For One. As right now, Deku had to make sure to get everything prepared. It was going to be a little special event that he had planned. As for All For One, he'll be taken into questioning and soon even end up encountering All Might, to which both of them actually end up having their final discussion as well as their final goodbyes, where All Might making it very clear to All For One that this is the end of the line for him, and basically that his entire lineage of suffering is about to come to an end now. With All For One getting one last laugh over All Might by pretty much stating that Shigaraki as well as Nanashimura are actually related, which actually ends up causing a ginormous damage, what actually causes ginormous damage on All Might, as he just couldn't believe the horrors, as well as the fact that he couldn't believe just how close he was to the guy and how close he was to save him. So due to this, and with that thought in mind, All Might, thanks to the fact that he still has a quirk, he decides to actually use the very limited time he has as a hero now. He will try his best to save as many people as possible, but more precisely, he will try everything in his power to actually get back and save Shigaraki from himself, as well as the clutches that All For One had over him for so many years. All while at the same time though, Deku would already be there making the final preparations, as finally, it was finally time for all of it to come to an end. It was finally time for him to finally fulfill the final promise that he made, and also, it was finally time for him to get true and rightful revenge. As you see, moving on once again from the story, we now turn to another scene. As you see right now, we see All For One as he would just be humming a tune, laughing and just cackling about the whole thing that happened between him and All Might, as after all, he truly believed that he got the last laugh. And by this point, it's already been a month since the whole event between Deku and All For One. But you see, this is when suddenly All For One will actually end up falling asleep. And when he does, the next time he wakes up, he realizes that he's in an unfamiliar room. As he tries to make sense of the whole thing and tries to keep a grasp on it, this is when he then realizes that, well, number one, he was no longer in his restraints. Not that it was really needed, considering the fact that he was still paralyzed from the neck down. And number two was the fact that he was in an unfamiliar area. As All For One tries to make sense of everything, this is when suddenly lights would then flash on, as he ends up seeing himself in this ginormous futuristic dome, as he tries to make sense about what just happened here. Until suddenly he would then hear it, the voice of Deku. You see, Deku by this point decided that he needed a very proper punishment for All For One here. After all, everything that the man did to Melissa and Inko, that was enough for death. But soon after finding out about everything he did, he thought that there was only one true way to punish someone as disgusting as him. Someone who was such a failure in Deku's eyes. As basically Deku begins to monologue and actually making All For One remember the exact same thing he said to him, this made All For One beginning to laugh as he actually tries to ask Deku what exactly he intends to do. Kill him? Because so far All For One is not scared of anything that Deku is capable of doing. And when Deku actually heard this, he just began to laugh at the comment that All For One made, until finally he ends up asking All For One what he thought about just simply existing. Now when All For One heard this, he begins to laugh as he basically begins to tell Deku about his whole philosophy on just life in general. And when Deku hears this, he can immediately understand that All For One was just someone who was just born to be this disgusting and cruel being that he was today. It was literally something from at birth that he turned out this way. Which I guess it made sense in Deku's eyes, as after all, it seems as if it was the perfect way and the most perfect punishment for something like this. As in Deku's eyes right now, All For One was not only a failure, but he was also a mistake. But it was fine, as just like when you're writing something and accidentally, make a mistake there, you could always just simply erase it. As this is when Deku then begins to actually comment down to All For One, basically explaining what All For One actually told him during the fight, telling Deku that would be better if he didn't existed. To which Deku had to agree. It would have been better if someone didn't exist. But unfortunately, that someone was All For One. As All For One tries to make sense of exactly what Deku meant, this is when suddenly Deku then powers up a device, to which he ends up just simply calling it Omega Device. At least for now, until he finds an actual cool acronym that he can think of later. As this is when All For One will see this device, this is when he actually feels true fear. as he tries to tell Deku that this won't stop anything, as he always has a different plan, a different scheme. But just as he was thinking this though, this is when Deku then reveals about Shigaraki, and then about the doctor, about the Nomu, as Deku begins to pretty much list off every single plan that All For One had, and how he basically shut it all down. How he was able to locate Shigaraki and turn him in, gave him actual therapy pretty much, even though he's still serving time in prison for helping out the villains. How he was able to get Kodagiri and is already working on trying to get him back to normal. How he pretty much shut down the entire operation of Nomus. How he got the doctor in jail and many other people that work for All For One. Basically, Deku is pretty much telling All For One that he pretty much invalidated his entire existence, as he made All For One truly be the ginormous failure that he really was, as he's unable to do anything at this very moment. As All For One just simply ends up looking at Deku before asking him just one simple question: what is he? To which Deku just simply scoffs before simply saying that he was a scientist. As with that thought in mind, this is when Deku then, without any hesitation, ends up pushing All For One into the device. As just like that, we will see All For One get absorbed into this device, and when he does, he's just erased. Nothing left of the man that caused so much terror for All Might and many others of previous generation. No more of the stain that was left on human life. And finally, no more of a curse that was supposed to plague the users of One For All. As now that All For One has been deleted, this is where we then see Deku then walk out of this facility, as finally his revenge was complete and the job was done. As you now do another time skip. Moving on to the final few moments of these exams, we see the world of My Hero turn completely futuristic now, as by this point now, people are kind of less reliant on quirks, as already society seems fit without them, as after all, they had technology taking care of most problems, and things were going quite well. But the thing is though, heroes are still a thing. They are still there, except they're not really as fascinating, as well as the fact they're not heavily reliant as they were, just like they were in the main timeline. That means that society is able to progress quite easily. And another thing that actually ends up happening is the fact that Melissa does actually end up becoming the #1 hero, as she ends up working her butt off and actually ends up making drastic improvements to the point where she truly ends up becoming the #1 hero and mastering One For All, inheriting the symbol of peace that All Might had once had. Although with Deku, by this point, he was known as the richest and basically the most powerful man that there was. But you see, the thing is, to Deku, he didn't really see all that as important, as not only did he fulfill the promise that he made as a kid, but he also finally ended up getting revenge for his mother, as right now his mother is living a comfortable life. Not only that, but he still is dating Melissa, and to make it even better, they're already having thoughts about starting a family together, as things were really going good for Deku. As the very final scenes of this What If, we actually see Deku once again currently at work, making sure that everything was going safely around the entirety of the world. But as he does, Deku is also working once again and pushing his knowledge to the absolute limit. As when he does, this is when we then see a change actually occur. As you see, during the time when Deku was doing this, he once again gets an alert from Melissa that there were some events actually happening, as she was still doing the hero work. When Deku heard this, he immediately nodded his head, as he already knew that she actually just wanted him to be there so that way they can just bust bad guys together. So when he does, this is when suddenly he begins to actually activate the portal, putting on his nanosuit. But when he does, instead of releasing the bluish portal, Deku actually ends up seeing that something changes from it, as it changes from the normal blue color to now a greenish one. As Deku ends up looking at this green color with a kind of amused look before entering, as this would actually be the end to what if Deku had Rick's intelligence. Thank you all so much for tuning into this What If. Oh my god, guys, this What If was so hard, guys. Guys, I literally finished this video at 3 a.m. This video took so many days to make, guys, because the thing is, it was so hard about like how I even want to do this What If, mostly because of the fact that I didn't know how exactly I wanted Deku to be like. I didn't know if I wanted him to have like a Rick-like personality, because the thing is, this isn't what if Deku had Rick's reincarnation. This is if he had his intelligence. And Deku is not exactly the same way as Rick, considering the fact that both of their circumstances are different. But yeah, guys, it was definitely hard to really make this What If. It was really hard to plan everything out, but hopefully you guys do enjoy it. I want to thank y'all so much for tuning into this What If. Thank you to the person who commented on this what if idea, and if you guys have your own, do the same thing. And I do believe I don't got nothing else to really announce. So with that being said, it's your host Sage G Samurai here, and he's signing off. Peace and have a lovely day.